Welcome, data people. We are Zuma. My name is Matt, and this is Data for Good. This podcast is brought to you by Zuma. Zuma is a dedicated recruitment company for senior data, insights, and analytics professionals, connecting you with Berlin's most influential companies. The Data for Good podcast is for the world of data analytics and engineering, giving you access to the thoughts and opinions of Berlin's most successful data people. Today, we are joined by Selim Nowicki, Head of Data Analytics at TIA. So we've been looking forward to this episode as Selim will inform us about the journey into senior leadership, the value of data, and discussing growing a data domain. Selim, welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Matt. Thanks a lot. I'm excited to be here, actually, and was looking forward to this podcast and the questions that you'll pose today.
Fantastic. So, yeah, we're closing in on 2023. How are you and the team feeling about the rest of the year?
I think it's already it's soon, right? You think, okay, 2023, it's next year, but it's already only 3 months, is it? And if we count only half of December as is, it's literally like 10 weeks. So we can feel the burn already. That there's a lot of things to still do this year, and the time is the end of the year is nigh.
Yeah, it's coming around quickly. I think it's a good time of year because people realize that there's that break towards the end and a lot of family time usually. So a big push towards the end of the year. So the podcast, let's start and let's talk leadership. So we hear a lot about getting into leadership as a step from an IC or a tech lead, but we don't hear too much about getting into senior leadership and taking that next step. So it's something that you've experienced quite recently. How did you find the transition?
I think it's with there's always this in different roles. For instance, when you're becoming on the IC level a senior, right, where you start to take on a bit more responsibility, not only for yourself and for others. It's usually there's growth pains that are accompanying this transition. And I think from leadership to senior leadership, that's the same. But the backpack and richness of experience you have to bring with you is much broader. And I think whatever shortcomings you might have had in the past as well, they really come out. So I think this transition is definitely not an easy one. It's a testing one. And requires to really dig deep into your past to be able to come on top of it at the end.
Would you say when you're in that transition, would you feel it was more intense than previous transitions?
I would say to some degree, yes. When you think about it, you first transition from this more operational to a more of a tactical level, right? And that usually means that you still do, even when you're transitioning into the tactical level, you still perform certain tasks. Your role is still to answer specific questions, to basically enable others. But when you go into that next level, there might be still missing links along the journey, right? So there might be missing links within the team that you're managing, both on a tactical and operational level. And trying to address all of those in parallel, it's like juggling with 3 or 4 balls, right? It's you're not wearing, maybe some of the listeners have transitions to a head role, team lead role, tech lead role. You have to wear 2 hats. And now imagine that you don't have 2 hats, you usually have 3 hats at least. And I think this is the time where the skills really come out to be able to try to restructure your entire environment so you're able to sustainably as well try to tackle your challenges and problems one by one. So it becomes more of a system that you're operating with.
So it sounds it's a lot more system driven. There's a lot more process and protocol that you have to be stricter with.
In a way, right? I'm going to keep referring to this kind of transition to team lead because I think people can relate to that quite well. you have to start building processes to ensure that the team's operating well, right? That you're working on the right stuff, that the people are not overworked. And I think when you go into that next level, it's about creating certain frameworks, right? Frameworks which are a collection of processes, and that and if you would not start creating these, like that, you would always drown the amount of work, or certain imperfections of the setup that you're in will catch up with you, and this kind of only starts collecting and collecting, and the problems begin to amounting. So it's really about recognizing which areas require attention, require a new framework, a new way of thinking, but that framework also has to encompass not challenges usually of one unit, but of multiple units. So everything that you would actually work on has to be able to be applicable to ideally the entire data organization. Because if not, then you're creating separate standards for separate teams. And you have to avoid that at all costs, because at the end of the day, you also want to create an organization that is fair, that's transparent, and is holding each other to the same standards.
I think it's fair to say that when you are a junior or growing in your career, it's very important to own your own tasks, your own focus areas. And as you develop and evolve within your profession, you start to learn that it's about the bigger picture, and there's more parts that you need to consider. When you go into senior leadership, how much more is that emphasized, that you have to think about more people than just your own tasks?
Absolutely. So I think we can think about this in two ways. One of them is when you think about your team, let's say in this case the data organization, right? So you always have to think not only about your domain or your group. It's also about all the other groups and how you interact. I think this is the one aspect that every decision you take, you always has to be taken in that wider context. Whereas if you're an IC or team lead, you can just look at your team and try to optimize as much as you can. But there's, I think, the second part, which is probably even more important, is this up and side part of the role, right? So I think you start managing way more up and start managing way more sideways to your stakeholders. So one of the key differentiators is trying to identify the pockets that you should be addressing and are not, which is by understanding the full map of problems in the business, trying to say that's where data is needed. Make the case why it's needed, and try to prove it also with data. Okay, by investing here, we would be able to support the business. And the support the business is a good question, right? Like, how do we quantify that? But that we can leave also for later.
So it sounds, I mean, a lot of people say when you climb a mountain, the higher you get, the more you see. What comes first? Does your understanding of business needs and the importance of those come first, or is it something that you learn as you evolve?
I think it's, as with any new job, you get dropped into a pond, and there's more information that you can ever consume. So it's really about identifying and prioritizing the right information to be consuming. So I think theoretically, right, as a senior leader, you would have access and potentially could participate in all of your sub-teams, rituals and meetings and all of this, and all of those of your peers, that they also have their own organizations and their own sub-teams. And when you think about that, probably the number of meetings that you could be attending is probably tripling at least. So it's really about this prioritization. It's about trying to create bridges for your team where they can actually operate without you being in the room, right? But with only you being a consulted person when necessary. you definitely see more. And that lateral view is very important, because the effectiveness of your team is highly dependent, especially in data, on how closely can you collaborate with your stakeholders. How closely do you understand their processes, how they function, how they prioritize, and whether we can plug those two systems together. So plugging two systems together that were not created for the same purpose or do not have the same mindset, skill sets, can be a huge challenge of its own. So this is where the part of negotiation with peers really helps. And having an understanding of the entirety of the system really helps, because that can help with building up argumentation to shift either your own processes or others' processes into one swim lane. Yeah.
Where can we build on these skills?
I think that's a fantastic question. Where can we build these skills? I think we acquire them on the way. Many of these we acquire on the way. I think one thing that really helps, but I think that's probably universal, is to still have that humility. If you're a humble person, right, then it's easier to say, oh, actually your system is better than mine. Probably let's just connect to yours. And also that makes the discussions with your peers more fact-based. They're more willing to speak to you, and their willingness to speak to you is this is where how we can really unlock the value, right? Because if you would allow egos to come into play, senior leaders of two different organizations, that's just clashing over ego, that's just a recipe for disaster. So I'd say first and foremost, trying to be human, humble, and really trying to understand where do your peers also come from, why they do certain things in a certain way. Because without this understanding, it'll be very challenging to come to a common ground based off of which we can build a system in which both of you can operate well.
Being human and using data, people would think they're very different, but being as human as possible with all the data available is a powerful tool. I think a question that a lot of people ask themselves personally in their day-to-day business and greater organizations is the value of data. What is the proof that we are getting value from our data?
Oh, I think this could be a topic of its own podcast series, right? I think this is a question that's being asked throughout. I'll link it back to this being human and data. Data does not ever live in isolation. So a person might deliver the perfect analysis. A data person can build the best dashboard, even build an amazing data product that would recommend what the person should be doing next. If we do not consider the human aspect of it, it'll never succeed, right? Because at the end, there's usually a human taking some sort of decisions. So I think this is the one part where we should never ignore. And I think in that, we are usually dependent in our value creation on how a specific asset is used. So ultimately, right, as data people, our role, we could define it in a way, that our role is to improve speed and quality of decision making, right? It might be automated, it might not, but ultimately this is how we want to influence the business. So if we can connect ourselves to the value generation of others by enabling them, that probably is the easiest way to kind of show your value, right? Because let's say if I connect my actions to the improvements that we have in our product engineering organization, if we can show, okay, we enable you to take the right decisions, we can say, okay, we get a share of the value that you're creating. And then who's to tell, like, what share of that value is data team versus not data team? That's for someone else to assess, but we work as a unit. This is why the kind of embedded system is really helpful for that, because you tie your value creation to the value creation of others whom you support. I think in this embedded system that works very well. Of course, there are other categories by which we can also measure value, but this is definitely one of the stronger ones, I'd say. Now, I'll dig a little bit deeper still over here. So, okay, so let's say we have this product engineering organization. It had like a certain value, right? But how do they prove, and this is how they prove their value to the business as well, right? Because if we're combined, we're linked, like we have to make sure that that works well. I think over here, understanding how the business operates, this lateral view, seeing more things. Every startup, scale-up company most likely has a business plan. And this business plan has certain drivers. So it's really understanding, okay, how do people in finance, for instance, interpret value? Like, what are their drivers of their business cases and business models? Because if we can understand those, we can always try to link whatever we're doing with the business plan. And then our impact can be more easily translated into output that is either revenue or reduction of cost or anything else that then boils down to a euro value. And when you can put a euro value on your work, or can put a euro value on your contribution, or let's say on the project to which you contribute, then arguing for your existence as an organization, it becomes much easier.
How do we improve these connections
between the different aspects of organization?
Yeah, exactly. Because it sounds that's fundamental and could be make or break. Strong connections could be a strong indicator of success. So how do we improve this link?
I think this is where also one of the key differences between senior leadership and the middle leadership really comes out, right? Because, as I said, it becomes way more managing upward and sideways, and to a lower degree managing downwards, because this downwards you have to just rely on having that second level leadership that that can actually deal with the tactical, because trying to wear the hat of all of these usually means you'll fail on all fronts. Ignoring one of these will also mean you fail. So it's always about really trying to build a system that helps you to focus on the right things, which in senior leadership usually means managing upward, sideways. So you can actually understand not only how's the business plan constructed today, how can product, for instance, or operations plug into that? How are we supporting them best to provide the biggest impact on the end outcome? Yeah. But for these, this is where we also have to rely on others. So the data education part of the role never goes away. It's just, it becomes something different. It's not about how to read this dashboard or how to interpret my analysis. It becomes how can we work in tandem, right? How can we plug our processes together so we can make it easier for you, for me, to prove our value generation.
And just before we dig a little deeper and go into a different area related, a lot of people won't know what B2G is. So just a quick overview into B2G.
Yeah, so B2G stands for business to government. I am one of the data analytics leaders at Tier, and the area that I'm focused on is cities. So the role of my domain is to ensure that the relationship between our company and the local governments is a good one. I think that area by itself is it's different, especially when you think from a data perspective. Think about it this way. Much of the relationship with cities is based on our department in Tier is called public policy. There's people who try to shape policy that would be beneficial for both the city and the company, ideally. Mm-hmm. And when you think about policymakers, data-driven is not the first thought that comes to mind.
Not traditionally, no.
Not traditionally. I'm not saying that that's the case everywhere, right? But traditionally, it's not really the case. You could probably compare them a bit more to brand marketers of 10 years ago. But there is a way, right? They do understand that data is needed and that there is a lot of value to unlock. But how you serve that is different, right? So this is where in these cases, you have to always go that extra mile. So delivering data is usually not enough. Delivering data insights may be okay, but the use of it will always might be twisted in a way that it was not intended. So it's really about delivering a data product that is built for a specific use case that they know how to use, know how to present. So there's a lot more contextual information that's required. There's a lot more instructions, a lot more onboarding as well to how to interpret this information, how to use it, how to present it. What's the line of argumentation that you should use? Which things you should not say because we're not able to say that based on this data. So there's a specific way to work with it. But at the same time, when you think about it, working with B2, like in B2G, the impact you can have is different, right? Because it can influence an opinion that matters how cities are being developed in our case, which is quite an exciting thing if you think about it. For all those in Berlin, for instance, you've seen all the investment in the cycling infrastructure that was happening recently, whether that be on Karl Marx Allee or Invalidenstraße and all of that, right? And if we can play a role in supporting that, the next decisions will be better. I'm super excited about that.
It sounds powerful that you can not just impact customers, but you're impacting everyone when you're dealing with the government and policies. And it sounds like that's pretty motivating.
I mean, this is the nice thing about Tier, that its mission to some degree is it goes beyond the company itself, right? Our success would be if cities are more friendly for micromobility, whether that be private or not. It makes our business better. So I think that's where I see the excitement about working here myself.
I can hear the passion, which is always good to hear. You touched on it briefly about how you had to grow a domain on route to where you are now. How would you describe the task of growing a data domain from scratch almost?
I think in my case, especially like in this role, maybe it's not from scratch. Like I've had a few very talented individuals that I can rely on. So that's the great part about it. And good companies, you have good company. That's the nice thing. But usually success in data often means that people become more hungry for more data. That usually requires, maybe not linearly more people, hopefully not, but it does require more attention, especially if you're trying to span into new areas. So for instance, when I was arriving in the team, like we were focused on one area of our stakeholders way more, right? And that's okay, let's recognize that we could actually have impact in more. And this lateral view helps, okay, like we should be influencing these part of decisions with data. We should be influencing these part of decisions with data. And suddenly you recognize, oh, there's a new set of problems that we have to solve. But being in senior leadership, the time frame in which you think is slightly different, right? So it's not about, oh, it's next month, it's next 2 months, 3 months. It's really the horizon has to be longer. So if you think about it in the shorter term, okay, we identify a new domain, let's start working with them. But that always is going to impact the other things that you've been taking care of until now. So either manage to achieve amazing efficiency gains that enable you to shift part of your focus, great. But usually even that would not be sufficient, right? Because you have to have that focus with time start specializing. And that usually means that you have to grow, because a day only has 24 hours. And let's not be naive that you can do the same quality of work for 2 domains as one, just using the several hours a day that you're supposed to work.
There's a trade-off.
There's always a trade-off. And let's also not be naive that, oh, I can, right? I'm able to, because that is also not a sustainable system. There's just a different valve, like going off somewhere else. So the awareness of how to approach a problem has to be there, and it has to always be solved from the perspective of longer time frame, right? Because, oh, I'm able to cover one additional area for a week, maybe for a month, right? That's already creating strains. 6 months, recipe for burnout, right? Yeah, so exactly, and you want to really avoid that. So it's really about identifying, okay, there's a new domain, there's a new set of problems, and that usually has to be tied to trying to build a business case. Can either build a theoretical business case, or we can try to prove some value even better, get them a bit excited and tell them we could be doing more of that, but we can't. And that is the road that paves the way to show, okay, we could be delivering way more value, but for that we have to usually grow the domain, create a new domain, create new processes. And that's something that, usually would not happen on a tactical level time frame, which is usually around 3 to 6 months, because you know better than I, how long does it take to hire a data professional, a good one,
Six months is optimistic.
6 months is like 3 month notice periods plus the time, you search for them, and they usually want to take a holiday as well somehow. And suddenly it's 6 months easily. So it's really about the awareness of the area where you want to target, what value can you contribute, make a business case for that, try to create expectations that you're not able to keep addressing some of the things until you fill those roles. And once you do, creating the processes around that. So it plugs into the system. Because if you don't plug it into the rest of the system, so suddenly, you're again carrying 2 hats, and you want to always reduce it to one, ideally.
So if we ideally want to hire, we've seen this desire or want to grow in this area and there's opportunity there. What's preventing us from training people who already know the business needs to come in and start their journey as opposed to hiring?
I mean, if those are present and you could prioritize their time for this, except for something else, I'm a big supporter. There is an aspect, though, that sometimes can be challenging, right? That person also can split in two. They've had a set of responsibilities before. So they deprioritize those responsibilities and someone else, so they rehire for that same skill set. Or is it you that hires? I think it's a fair thing to consider. The one thing that, at least with bigger organizations, you want to, be aware of as well is the certain set of standards you want to have for certain roles, right? So a data analyst should carry similar weight, it doesn't matter where, in which team, sub-team domain they're placed. So for instance, as you say, right, the acumen, the understanding of the business, of the problem area, this is really important, and you should always prioritize that over skills. But there's also, is there a base set of skills that you can build on, right? Because if not, then getting that person up to speed might take too long. Or second case, you might not have the people to bring that person up to speed. Right? So if you're, for instance, opening a new domain that that it requires a slightly different skill set, and bringing someone in that doesn't know how to interact with the data organization, that as a manager is going to be a higher burden on that manager. And the question is, do you have that time wavelength to actually do that? Because your own time is the one resource that you have to master in managing it, going up the ranks, because there's only that many productivity hacks that you can do. It's really about relentlessly prioritizing which things to address, which things am I able to do, which things not. And I think that in the transfer or upskilling someone, this is something that has to be considered. I think this is why, for instance, a healthy organization that has a diverse set of seniority and experiences, I think that is a very good breeding ground for more people that you can bring with you on your journey. If you have a team of 6 juniors, adding another junior to that, just increases the burden of the person that has to coach them. And you want to build an organization that is sustainable, that can, keep developing. It's a little bit like the demographic pyramid, right? When you think about it, it has to have certain health for it to be sustainable, to be able to stand the test of time.
Yeah, I think looking at populations and the curves, and looking at why can't we see that in business, to juniors, to seniors. Some prefer senior heavy, some prefer junior heavy. Where is best? Do you think there is a prime example?
It highly depends on the problem space, I would say. Because I believe that there are spaces where a junior heavy organization is completely fine. Especially I think when organizations are younger, for instance, right? Because the problem that you're trying to solve, you need data ninjas, you need just motivated people to churn out the numbers and just help out the business. But at the same time, a highly professionalized business where a domain is addressing a small piece of a tool, for instance, then the skill set required is slightly different. And maybe you can still have a mix, right? But you cannot have an army of 6 juniors trying to address it, because they don't have necessarily the backpack of experience is required to think about that problem space. So I think that depends a little bit on the stage of the organization and the problem space that you're trying to address. I'm usually for a balanced one, unless the business requires something like specifically different. Because that also gives you continuity, right? The seniors have someone to coach. You have some people that are aspiring to become a senior. You have either a staff level somewhere who can coordinate, the seniors and forward the entire thinking about professionalizing the approach in a company. So if you have these different levels, I think there's less competition between people. There's more health. If a person leaves, that there's more space for people to grow into these spaces as well. So it's a much healthier setup. But at the same time, I recognize that in some cases, like just a specific level of seniority is required. Like we do not have this system at Tier yet, but I've heard about the system where we have data business partners. So people who really can understand the problem space in a variety of different ways. They can really become a consultant between the central data team and either a domain or a market or a place like that. Put someone who does not have a background in working in data and working with business people, and this is an extremely challenging role, because you have to think about insights from a collection of different areas in the business. So I think definitely there are roles where that experience is definitely required.
I think it's a topic we could probably talk for hours about. There is no right answer.
Never is.
No, but I think the value of data as a resource is becoming more and more apparent, and these roles are coming to fruition to facilitate and enable decision making with all the tools that we have available. Time has absolutely flown, like we've mentioned. It's been a great conversation, a lot of insights and valuable nuggets that I think we can take away. To wrap up with a final question, if you were to speak to a younger Selim entering into a career in data, what would the one thing be that you'd tell him?
I don't think I've done it wrong necessarily, but I'd still, I think, accent it for my past self, a younger Selim, to always prioritize to work with the right people. I think that's just, if you have a good environment around you and people that stimulate and also give you that nice vibe of just spending the day at work together, that's just worth a lot. I think, and both on the human side, of course, but equally as much on the professional side. So people that you spend that are fun to spend time with, but you don't learn by interacting with them, that's also not great.
People first, like it a lot. Well, yeah, you've taught us a lot. We could have spoken for probably hours. I think these topics lead quite nicely onto a future podcast, hopefully in maybe the next series, and we would love to have you on again, but that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for your time, Selim. It's been educational for us all, and hopefully to anyone who is listening. To the listeners and viewers, as always, drop any questions or feedback into the comment section, and we'll pick out some to be answered on future episodes. Don't forget to like and share, and we can get the message out to as many people as possible. But from us, it's bye. Thanks once again, Selim.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for having me here. Yeah,
it's been a pleasure, our pleasure. And yeah, ciao for now.
Ciao.